a real powerhouse in the world of academia and has the admiration of a lot of people, myself included, who work in open education. And she's all about, her whole career has been about strong scholarly communities and making sure we all stay connected and stay collaborating. She has many past books, including Generous Thinking, A Radical Approach to Saving the University, Planned Obsolescence, Publishing Technology and the Future of Academia, and The Anxiety of Obsolescence, the American Novel in the Age of Television. Kathleen's work is really focused on the shaking things up and making academia better for everyone. And she's writing about that in her next upcoming book, Leading Generously, Tools for Transformation. And that should be coming from Hopkins Press probably in October. Kathleen's work includes working on the Humanities Commons, a giant open network that's there and available for us all and is helping to connect thousands of scholars across the globe. She started this work during her time with the Modern Language Association. She worked there. She helped craft the 8th edition of the MLA handbook, and she's really been helping us share in academia for a really long time. If that's not enough, she's also president of the board of directors for the Educopia Institute, and she's helping shape the world of education from there as well. Today in our talk, Open Matters, Kathleen's going to dive into why open source technology is so important for digital literacy and digital citizenship. We're living in a time where we can often be told that the licensing isn't what really matters, that it's perhaps the innovation that matters, and the licensing is not important. So I love that Kathleen started right bluntly from the title and said, open does in fact matter. So let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Kathleen Fitzpatrick. Get ready to be blown away by her insights as we explore the exciting world of digital citizenship together.
Awesome. Ed, thank you so much for that. And now I hope this talk lives up to it. I'm really, really delighted to get to be here with y'all today on this, what turns out to be a beautiful Friday afternoon here in East Lansing. I'm going to quickly get my, okay. Sorry, I have to put the glasses on in order to be able to see what I'm doing in order to share my slides. So bear with me. I got old at some point and I'm not sure exactly when that happened. Okay, I believe you should be seeing my slides at this point.
Looks great.
Awesome. So again, delighted to be here with you, and I'm really looking forward to getting to share a little bit about what my team and I here at Michigan State University have been doing of late. A fair bit of what I'm going to end up talking about is focused on scholarly communication, and primarily because that's what my lab does. But it's got some deep resonances with what's going on in the world of educational technology today. And the TLDR on this talk is that the future of knowledge creation depends really heavily on the openness of the infrastructures that support our work. And I know that for a lot of people, the word infrastructure sort of triggers a little bit of a yawn reflex. You're not alone in that. As Deb Chatra points out in her brilliant book, How Infrastructure Works, and if you haven't read it, by all means do. It's really fantastic. She says, infrastructural systems are famously boring because the best possible outcome is nothing happening, or at least nothing unexpected or untoward. I mean, the best thing that infrastructure can do is remain invisible and just work. Right. But as Chatra also argues, the shape of our entire culture is dependent on our infrastructure. And where inequities are part of those systems engineering, they constrain the ways that culture can evolve. Oops. There we go. So infrastructure matters, right? And the educational and communications infrastructures on which we build, develop, design, and publish our work have deep implications for our abilities to foster social and epistemic justice in higher education and research and other aspects of knowledge creation and sharing, to empower communities of practice and their concerns in the development and dissemination of knowledge, to enable trustworthy governance and design and decision-making that's led by the communities that our publications and platforms are intended to serve. But all of this requires commitment to open public infrastructures in order to ensure that the work that we do in higher education can become actually equitable. So what is it I mean when I say actually equitable? And how might what I'm describing intersect with the aims of the open access and open education movements? I mean, we've heard a lot over the last 20 plus years, for instance, about the ways that open access should transform scholarly communication. If our work could be read more openly by anyone, it's been said, it might both have more impact on the world at large and create a more equitable knowledge environment. And of course, it's true that open access in its many present flavors has done a lot to make more research available to be read online. But the movement toward open access began as a means of attempting to break the stranglehold that a few extractive corporate publishers have established over the research and publishing process, and it hasn't succeeded. Right? The last decade in particular has revealed all of the resilience with which capital responds to challenges. And as those corporate publishers have responded to open access, they have in fact become more profitable than ever. Not only have they figured out how to exploit article processing charges in order to make some work published in their journals openly available, while continuing to charge libraries for subscriptions to the journals as a whole, but they've also developed whole new business plans, like the so-called read and publish agreements that keep many institutions tied to them. And they've developed new platforms and new infrastructures like discovery engines and research information management systems that serve to increase the corporate lock-in over the work that we produce on campus. So the open access movement was founded more than 20 years ago in order to make it possible, as the original Budapest statement said, to share the learning of the rich with the poor and the poor with the rich, make this literature as useful as it can be, and lay the foundation for uniting humanity in a common intellectual conversation and quest for knowledge. Now, by the time the Budapest group reconvened in 2022 to celebrate its 20th anniversary, it had become all too obvious that the dominant open access publishing mechanisms that had emerged in the interim had not had the desired impact, leading the BOAI 20 statement to argue that, and this is a quote, OA is not an end in itself, but a means to other ends, above all to the equity, quality, usability, and sustainability of research. To put it a bit more plainly, thanks to the resilience of the corporations that control the infrastructure of scholarly communication, open access in its dominant forms today has, if anything, reduced equity by attaching high fees to the formats and platforms that allow publications to circulate most widely. So scholars whose fields or institutions or nations did not have ready access to grant funding or to means of subsidizing publishing fees wind up getting silenced, right? Closed out of participation in sharing their learning. So it's for this reason that the 20th anniversary Budapest recommendations led with a call to host open access research on open infrastructure, recognizing that the control of the infrastructure by profit-seeking entities cements inequities. And this is true even where the large corporate publishers purport to create opportunities for the disadvantaged by offering fee waivers and discounts on their publishing charges. Those discounts only serve to normalize a model in which it's considered correct for those who produce knowledge to pay corporations to host and circulate it. Now, I want to be super clear about what I mean by that. Right? The way that things are currently done in the dominant forms of open access publishing today involve author side fees. And that idea, right, the way things are done, is the heart of any culture. Now, to call it culture is not to diminish its significance at all, as Peter Drucker has long since been quoted in saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast in the corporate universe, which is to say that the normalized, unspoken assumptions about the ways things are done will take precedence over all but the best laid alternative plans. And because of that, real strategic change often demands deep cultural transformation as a prerequisite. Now, take as an example the case of fair use, right? Which, as we all know, at least in the US context, is not a legally defined status with respect to the use of copyrighted materials, but rather a fuzzy affirmative defense posture built out of several highly subjective factors, requiring the defendant to prove their innocence in a courtroom that presumes their guilt. Right, so fair use is a small and eternally at-risk exception within a culture that's built on the presumption of the correctness of owner control, in other words. And as Susan Bielstein argues in Permissions, a survival guide, also a really amazing book if you haven't read it, every time we ask permission to use an image or a quotation in a way that ought to be defensible under fair use, we wind up weakening the exception, and we normalize the dominance of ownership, giving credence to corporate claims that we ought to be asking permission at all times, because that's the way things are done. So open access fee waivers are similarly a precarious exception within a larger culture of corporate control of the mechanisms of publishing. That exception presumes that you should pay to make use of those mechanisms, even if in your particular case, they might bend the rules. Right? So every time we accept a corporate publisher's discount or fee waiver, or make use of a read and publish deal, or otherwise use public funds to cover the increasingly ridiculous sums charged in order to circulate the products of research, we help strengthen the argument that it's perfectly normal for corporations to control the flow of knowledge and to profit from doing so. All of which is to make the faintly obvious point that ownership matters, and especially when it comes to infrastructure. So, as the authors of the report entitled Mind the Gap, a landscape analysis of open source publishing tools and platforms note, whatever progress might have been made in OA publishing was mitigated by the fact that publishers still control the publishing infrastructure, right? They still own the journals, for instance, which are one key bit of the infrastructure on which we publish. And unless the ownership of the journal changes, thus enabling a real transformation in the cultural expectations surrounding how the journal operates, the infrastructure remains out of our control. Right? All that's changed is the means through which we pay to access it. So that's all been a lot about publishing, but more or less everything that I've said about corporate publishers and their control of infrastructure is doubly true of the ed tech landscape. Now, the systems that we use to manage, which is already a kind of nervous-making word, right? To manage our courses and student learning are too often technologies of extraction, right? They hoover up resources from our institutions and content from us and our students. And while their stated goals in creating the best possible environments for digital learning may be admirable, their prime motive is by and large delivering value for shareholders. As a result, education is not the field that they are serving, but rather the resource that they are strip mining. And developing open source, academy-owned alternatives to these platforms is a serious challenge, but one that demands to be met. So, what alternatives do we have? Well, in the realm of publishing, I mean, we could move our journals from these extractive corporations to nonprofit publishers. But it's, of course, important to note that the distinction that I just suggested between corporate and nonprofit is a vast oversimplification. Right? There are corporations that are actually good actors in scholarly communication space, and there are nonprofits that are really, really not. So what we might need to be paying more attention to is less business model per se than alignment at the basic level of our values and goals, right? Ensuring that our concerns about equity, about inclusiveness, and about the public good are matched by those of the partners with whom we choose to work. So university presses typically pass this test, right? Though not universally. There are a few such presses that operate a lot more like the big corporate publishers than we might want. But even though most university presses have yet to figure out the economics that will allow them to make the work that they publish fully open, most of them do center access and equity as their purpose, rather than increasing shareholder value. And besides university presses, there are lots of other nonprofit, values-aligned publishing platforms and services out there that we might consider moving our publications to, not to mention moving our energy and our time in terms of reviewing and editing and so forth. So these include what have been called platinum or diamond open access publishers, such as the Open Library of the Humanities or open book publishers, just to name two. And what these projects have in common is their work to develop a new business model for publishing that neither involves restricting access to published texts to those individuals or libraries that can afford to pay for them, but nor do they restrict the ability to publish to those with the ability to cover the publishing costs. They instead ask those institutions that can afford to contribute to the ongoing support of the platform to do so, thus keeping access to the platform open to everyone. Right, they appeal to those institutions' desires for values alignment. And these projects and platforms and publishing workflows ultimately rely on public and institutional investment in order to make both publishing and reading freely available to all. And they're therefore, for that reason, these platforms remain accountable to the publics that they serve. These platforms are, in other words, community-led rather than investor-led. Not only is their purpose aligned with that of the community that they serve, rather than focusing on increasing shareholder value through increasing profit margins, but they're governed by these communities that they serve. And this, as Deb Chatra argues, is the key to developing the sustainable, equitable infrastructures that we need for the future. She says only community-led networks, whether publicly owned or nonprofit cooperatives, even have the potential to incorporate broad-based accountability, long-term thinking, and an ethos of meeting needs. And this, more than anything, is what scholarly communication and educational technology need today. Broad-based accountability to scholars and fields and institutions rather than to shareholders, long-term thinking and an ethos of meeting our needs rather than those of investors. Hence the call in the 20th century, sorry, good grief, in the 20th anniversary Budapest Statement for hosting open access research on open infrastructure, right? Infrastructure that is led by us and that is accountable to us. And this is the fundamental orientation and driving purpose of my own project, right? Humanities Commons, which originated from a desire to build new avenues for more open, more public, more universally accessible scholarly communication for everyone. So in 2013, with support from the Mellon Foundation, the Modern Language Association launched an internally focused network, MLA Commons, that was designed to foster direct communication and collaboration among MLA members. In 2016, we extended that model, again with support from the Mellon Foundation and from the National Endowment for the Humanities, in order to embrace other fields across the humanities, establishing Humanities Commons as a platform for interdisciplinary communication among scholars and practitioners around the world. Account creation is open to any interested user, regardless of institutional affiliation, or professional status or organizational membership, and accounts are and will remain free of charge. Now, our goal is to provide a non-extractive, community-led, and transparently governed alternative to commercial platforms. Beyond that, however, we want to encourage our users to rethink the purposes and the dynamics of knowledge creation and dissemination altogether in ways that might allow for the development of new, open, collective, equitable processes of creating and sharing our work that recenter agency with those who are actually doing the work. So Humanities Commons is a multifunctional network supporting collaboration and communication among more than 33,000 researchers and practitioners across the humanities and around the world. The Commons brings together a large-scale WordPress-based publishing network with the social networking capabilities that are made available by BuddyPress, allowing users to create rich profiles that detail their work, to participate in a wide range of group discussions, and to build individual or group websites that can serve as portfolios, as journals, as networked projects, and more. Additionally, the Commons includes a library-grade repository with a WordPress front end that allows members to upload their work, to share that work openly with the broader Commons network, and to have the digital object identifiers and other metadata attached to it that render it a permanently addressable part of the larger scholarly communication ecosystem. So in 2020, Humanities Commons moved from the MLA to a new fiscal host here at Michigan State University and began work developing the first institutional node on the network, MSU Commons. Over the next 2 years, we received 2 significant investments of multi-year support from the NEH and the Mellon Foundation, which have allowed us to staff up, to remediate a lot of technical debt, and to develop a forward-looking roadmap toward a more sustainable future. Humanities Commons is built by and for scholars, and it's a values-enacted project, meaning that, among other things, we've put in place a participatory governance structure that allows both our individual users and our institutional sustaining members to have a voice in the project's future. We've developed network policies that emphasize inclusion and openness, and we're committed to transparency in our finances, and most importantly, to remaining not-for-profit in perpetuity. We're also working to sustain and build and sustain the kinds of new platforms and services that will allow for rich conversations among members of our community and between that community and the rest of the world. A year and a half ago, seeing the handwriting on the wall for the platform formerly known as Twitter, and frankly, having suffered through quite a number of unhappy years on that platform before the beginning of the end, we launched hcommons.social, which is a hometown flavored Mastodon instance in the hopes of providing a collegial, community-oriented space for informal communication among scholars and practitioners everywhere. And we currently have over 2,000 users who've created accounts on our instance in order to connect with users throughout the Fediverse. And we support those users through a strong moderation policy and a code of conduct. We also work to ensure that new policies and processes are discussed with that community of users before they're implemented. So this kind of openness matters enormously, right? Not just to ensure that we're living up to the values that we've established for our projects, but to ensure that there's a worthwhile future for them. Cory Doctorow has written extensively of late about what he has famously called, and you have no doubt heard way too much in the last couple of months, the enshittification of the internet, which stems directly from the funneling of what he here calls surpluses, but might also be described as attention or energy or value, like being sucked out of the community and piped into the pockets of shareholders. As he notes, the forces of enshittification are everywhere on the internet today, with Twitter only among the most obvious locations. More recently, however, he's written about why he's stuck with Mastodon, right? Rather than jumping over onto any of the big new corporate services like Threads or Blue Sky, saying that it's because he just fundamentally doesn't trust them. He goes on to note that the time and energy and brilliance and creativity that so many of us poured into Twitter only ended up coming to the ignominious end that it seems to be nearing increasingly by the day, right? The only thing worse, he says, than having wasted all that time and energy would be to have wasted it and learned nothing. The problem with walled gardens, as he says, is it's partly about their ownership, but it's largely about their governance, right? It's not just that the owners of any particular proprietary network might turn out to be racist, fascist megalomaniacs. It's that we have no control when and if they do. Right? Choosing open platforms means that we as users have a say in the future of the plots of ground we choose to develop. This is especially true for the kinds of work like knowledge production that is intended to have a public benefit. And so it's incumbent on us to ensure that those gardens aren't walled, right? That they don't just have a gate that management may one day decide to unlock and let select folks in and out. Rather, our gardens must be open from the start, right? Open to connect and cultivate in the ways that we as a community decide. And as Dr. O notes, Mastodon is far from perfect. And as much as I love our instance, hcommons.social is far from perfect too. But we're doing our best to ensure that we're running it in the open. In operating in the open, both for the commons and for hcommons.social, means that we're accountable to our users and responsible for safeguarding the openness of their work. So together, these two ideals undergird our commitment to provide alternatives to the many platforms that purport to make scholarly work more accessible, but in fact serve as mechanisms of corporate data capture, extracting values from creators and institutions for private rather than public gain. But as I've noted of hcommons.social, and as I'm now going to confess about humanities commons in general, we are not a perfect alternative. And this is where I think we need to dig down into the dirty underside of digital infrastructure. As Deb Chatra points out, infrastructure hides itself. She says infra literally means below. These systems are not just metaphorically, but often literally invisible in our walls and floors, under our roads, in a restricted area, or surrounded by a level of inattention that the science fiction author Douglas Adams satirically described as a somebody else's problem field. Now, if we're going to mitigate the inequities created by and sustained through our infrastructures, we have to get busy unearthing those systems and finding ways to build new ones. And so, we need to take a hard look at the fact that the infrastructure that Humanities Commons is built upon is AWS, or Amazon Web Services. As you might guess from the name, AWS is part of the greater Jeff Bezos empire, and every dollar that we spend to host our network with them helps keep his empire running. And run it does, right? Amazon's revenue derived from AWS passed 80 with a billion, 80 billion with a B is what I was trying to say, 80 billion with a B dollars in 2022. And as of August 2023, AWS hosted 42% of the top 100,000 websites and 25% of the top 1 million. Ironically enough, including Built With, the site that I used to get this data from, right? So why? Why has Amazon become so powerful a force in web hosting and cloud computing? Largely because they provide not just servers, but a powerful and wide-ranging suite of tools that help folks like us not just make our platform available, but also help keep it stable and secure and enable it to scale with enormous flexibility. Right? AWS provides connected equipment and tools that would be more than a full-time job for someone to maintain in-house, and it enables redundancy and global reach at speed, and it's relatively easy to manage. So it works for us, right? Just like it works for 42,000 of the top 100,000 websites across the internet. but I'm not happy about it, right? It's not just that I hate feeding more money into the Bezos empire every month, but that I know for certain that our values and Bezos's do not align. Right. And every so often, I have to stop and ask myself how much good it really does for us to build pathways of escape from the extractive clutches of Elsevier and Springer nature, only to have those pathways deliver us all into the gaping maw of Amazon. But AWS has a stranglehold on web-based platforms of our size, right? We're too big for a server kept under the desk. We're too complicated for a smaller hosting service, and we're too small for our own data center. And if you don't want to deal with the risks and costs involved in owning and operating the metal yourself, there just aren't many alternatives, and there are certainly not many good ones. My own institution, Michigan State University, like most institutions its size, operates both a large-scale data center through our central IT unit and a high-performance computing center under the aegis of the Office of Research and Innovation. Now, the latter can't really help us, as it's focused right now pretty exclusively on computational uses and not at all on service hosting. Right? In the former, our IT services comes with a suite of restrictions and regulations in terms of access and security, and pretty understandably so, given recent attacks and exploits, such as the one that caused our neighbor to the east to disconnect the entire campus from the internet on the first day of classes last fall. But nevertheless, I mean, as understandable as they are, these restrictions make it impossible for us to be flexible enough within the work we're trying to do with the commons. And in fact, our IT services strongly encourages projects like ours to make use of cloud computing, given the complexity of our needs and the risk averseness of the campus. And we have our pick of those cloud computing services. We can use AWS, we can use Microsoft's Azure, or we can use Google Cloud Services. Now, I just can't help but think that it's a bad thing for academic and nonprofit services like ours, right? Services that are working to be open and public and values aligned with our communities to be dependent on Silicon Valley megacorps for our very presence, right? We need alternatives. We need real alternatives. And I fear that we're going to have to invent them because, as the example of open access publishing demonstrates, waiting to see what commercial providers come up with is certain to increase our lock-in and increase the level of resources that they extract from our campuses. So what might it look like if our infrastructure for the dissemination of knowledge production if our infrastructure for the future of knowledge production and dissemination was community-led all the way down, right? What might enable the commons to leave AWS behind and instead contribute our resources to supporting a truly shared, openly governed, not-for-profit cloud service? Could such a service be collaborative with all member research institutions and organizations paying into a shared, professionally staffed data center? I mean, King's College London and JISC think so, right? They established the first collaborative research data center in the world 9 years ago, precisely in order to help UK institutions achieve economies of scale, to increase energy efficiency and to reduce costs. Now, of course, it's a lot easier to get all of the UK institutions of higher education on board with such a centralized initiative, partly because there are just fewer of them, and partly because they're all centrally funded. Now, the NSF funded Access CI project, which stands for Advanced Cyber Infrastructure Coordination Ecosystem Services and Support. This project points in this direction, but the process of getting access, to this infrastructure for a project like ours isn't 100% clear. And it's also not clear how durable and sustainable this program is. Real shared cyber infrastructure will require a high degree of institutional collaboration in order to become and remain viable. So What if an organization like Internet 2, for instance, instead of focusing so much on networking and protocols, and instead of offering to connect member institutions and organizations with corporate cloud services, right? What if they instead provided a real alternative, right? One that was not just developed for the academic community, but that would be governed by that community. I mean, what if each member institution or organization agreed to contribute its existing infrastructure along with its annual maintenance budget to a shared, distributed, community-owned cloud computing center? And could excess capacity then be offered at reasonable prices to other nonprofit institutions or organizations or projects like mine in a way that might entice them away from the Silicon Valley megacorps? I mean, would our institutions, our libraries, our publishers, and our many other web-based projects find themselves with better control over their futures? Now, none of this will be easy, and a lot of the questions that I've just asked fall, at least for the moment, into the realm of the pipe dream. But if we were willing to press forward with these questions, we might find ourselves in a world in which the scholarly communication and higher education infrastructures on which we build, develop, design, and publish our work can help us foster rather than hinder social and epistemic justice, can empower communities of practice by centering their needs and their work to meet them, and can enable truly trustworthy community governance and decision making in support of open, public, shared infrastructures for the future of knowledge production. So I'm going to leave it there for now, and we'll look forward to talking with you in the Q&A process. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Just as a reminder, you can go ahead and put any questions in the Q&A, and until you do, I'm just going to pepper our poor speaker with all the questions that I have. My first one is just about the scale and ambition of what you're talking about, especially at the time where we feel like we haven't solved the software infrastructure problem. To move on to the bare metal seems to be, almost a level of complexity that can be daunting. And how do you answer, a skeptical question like that?
I mean, it is. It's extremely daunting, and it makes my head hurt every time I think about it. So I'm right there with you. I mean, there's a reason why we ended up working with AWS, because it's all just there, and you click the button and you say, yes, please make my server larger right now. That's all I need, right? And that's all I want to think about because I'm focused on providing this service. But I also have to recognize that in my ability to say, yes, I'll just pay AWS, I end up putting other projects that can't afford AWS in a position of like, what are they necessarily going to use? I also further the commitment to using these platforms simply because they're there and they're easy to use. So I really I don't know. It is a head-breaking problem. But we've got really smart people on campus who do this for a living, who deal with this level of infrastructure. And my hope is that if we can bring them into collaboration with us, that we might be able to start thinking collectively about ways out of this particular bind.
One of my fears as IT departments have begun to be hooked on software as a service platforms is that we've allowed in higher ed our skills to atrophy a little bit in this aspect of building and maintaining and running our own servers, to the point that we might no longer have the expertise on the type of server that we really want. We would have no problem setting up simple lamp boxes for the audience. When I say lamp boxes, I mean like one of the very simplest forms of a server that is, the size that you make it, but to create these scalable, adjustable servers, we're not doing that as much in academia, and we're not retaining the talent of the engineers who need to fine tune that in academia. So we have to pay someone else to manage it for us.
Yeah, it is a serious problem. And one of the, I mean, quite frankly, one of the reasons for it is that the academy can't afford to pay engineers what Silicon Valley can afford to pay them, right? And so folks get lured away. On the other hand, there are a whole lot of veterans of Silicon Valley who are really disgruntled and disillusioned with the kind of work that's going on out there, and would really welcome a position that would allow them to do values-oriented work, and to really think about public service in that work. And so I think if we were able to see our way to making this a priority, we could find the folks who really want to do that work for us. But it has to be a priority. I also want to acknowledge that no individual institution can do this by themselves, right? It's just not possible. And even a consortium the size of the SUNY system, right? You've got a lot of collective resources, but even there, it's going to be hard. It's really going to take something as large as Internet 2, something that is national scale, to be able to think collectively about this kind of problem.
I'm watching the questions come in the Q&A, and one person say, all right, you've convinced me. I want to do this. I want to do this on my campus. Where's the playbook? Where do I start? Who are the key players that I need to convince? Who are my stakeholders? Where do I start on my campus?
Oh, that is such a good question. And I wish I had a playbook for you. I would be sending it out right now. I think, I mean, we have been in a sort of, at MSU, stop and start process of attempting to build what has been called the RFN, right? The Research Facilitation Network, that is attempting to bring together all of the primary research infrastructure providers on campus: the library, central IT, our supercomputing center, and then the smaller computing centers that exist around campus as well, to think collectively about how they can share resources. And starting from that point, like even just getting the campus to recognize that collaboration is in its interests, and then start thinking consortially, okay, how can MSU, as a member of the Big Ten Academic Alliance, you develop conversations through the CIO network that exists within the Big Ten? How can we bring together the vice presidents for research and innovation that also similarly have a network through the Big Ten, and get them to start having those conversations with their collaborators on the other Big Ten campuses? And then how can we like escalate that from there to the APLU or the AAU or those other kind of governing bodies of the larger institutions, that might then help us like just take the conversations outward. I think in particular of the work that the Big Ten libraries have been doing on what they call the big collection, really getting all of the libraries to recognize that we have more to gain from shared collection building than we have to lose in the competitiveness of how big our library is versus how big your library is, right? That if we can really think about what our shared power as a collecting organization might be within the Big Ten, we could transform the nature of what research capacity is within those institutions. And so I believe this to be true of cyber infrastructure as well, that if we can get past that impulse to protect what's ours, and instead think about how working together might lift everybody up, including us, we can get there. But that playbook is unfortunately yet to be written.
Well, you just finished your last book. Or perhaps the playbook would be your next endeavor.
All right, I'll get on it. That's next.
I want to challenge the notion a little bit about the lock-in with the corporate providers, a little bit, because it is such a huge issue that I don't know that we can solve it, and it's so hard to solve.
Yeah.
One of the things that helps me sleep at night is at least the fact that I'm not tied into Amazon and Amazon alone. I'm not
Yeah.
tied into Microsoft and Microsoft alone. I'm not tied into DigitalOcean and DigitalOcean alone. At the very least, there are alternatives at the infrastructure level, and that those alternatives are causing competition, are causing the prices to stay fairly low, in that it is affordable to run a small or medium-sized server. And I know that when I say that, you're going to laugh because of the hugeness of the humanities commons, which you have to keep going and are fundraising for, and keeping the lights on for that. So I want to pivot back to the programs we use a little bit, and a little bit about your advocacy there, because I feel like I feel like that is the first problem that a system like SUNY needs to solve, is figuring out ways that we can even allow open programs to stand at the same level during the RFP process.
Right.
I mean, if we can't even get on open software to begin with, then the kind of next level hand-wringing that you're doing about the infrastructure is almost not even on my mind yet.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk a little bit more about your advocacy to get those open, the open infrastructure built, maintained, chosen, and how should a system like SUNY, or how should a university like SUNY participate in those ecosystems?
Yeah, I think that is an extremely important question, and it's something that I mean, no doubt each of your campuses has seen this in different ways. The ways that, closed proprietary platforms for course management, for instance, come with closed proprietary standards for how the data is stored, and for how for what kinds of content you can export, and what it's possible to import it into thereafter. And we increasingly need to advocate, first of all, for making sure that we're using the open source systems that are committed to the portability of data, right? That will allow you, I know that you have been a big proponent of using WordPress on campus, that will allow you to I didn't even see that. That was very nicely done. Thank you. That will allow you, if you are building a site in WordPress, you can extract all of the content from that site, and you can use it in different ways, right? Like, you are not locked into WordPress because, first of all, the standard is open. Secondly, there's an enormous developer community that is out there building the plugins that will allow you, if you decide, as I did not too long ago, that, you know what, I don't want to host my site in WordPress anymore. I'm going to move it to Eleventy. So I'm going to use this plugin to extract 20 years of blog posts and migrate them into Eleventy. And it was a little fiddly, but it was possible. There are many corporate systems in which it's not even possible for you to get your data, because it has become their data, not yours, right? And so really making sure that when our campuses are contracting with software providers, that there is provision made for how I'm going to get my data back, right? For the standards that you're using as you are providing that data back to me, and my ability to recognize that the data is mine, where the data are mine, excuse me, social scientists, that it doesn't belong to the software provider, right? And that would go a long way toward increasing the level of openness on our campuses, just to be able to control the content that we're producing and make sure that we're able to continue to use it in the ways that we want to use it going into the future.
So it sounds like the first chapter of your playbook is going to be those definitions. So I'm going to
Yeah.
ask you, is an open API equal then or as good as open infrastructure?
It can be if there is a commitment on the part of those providing the API to really document it and to make it really open. But there are lots of APIs that purport to be open that are in fact not, and that are really not clear on what is done with the queries that you provide, and on like your ability to reuse the data that you acquire from the API. I think APIs, open APIs are a really important step in the right direction, but they're not like, that's not the end of the process.
I would agree with you. In the SUNY system, we've just moved our learning management system from one proprietary provider to another proprietary provider. And, you know, as an instructional designer, someone who's been part of this move, you know, we say, okay, we have standards that we can move. There is portability. There is the common cartridge, which the Ed Tech Association has been working on for decades to make sure that there's portability, and yet it's not perfect.
No,
And
no.
yet, when you move between these systems, you have breaks, you have errors, you have things that each of the custom systems do outside of the main API or outside of the standard that then can't be replicated exactly or with good fidelity in the new system. And things take work to move from system to
Right.
system, as you describe, as you move your blog from WordPress to 11D.
Yeah, it's fiddly. It's going to be. I mean, and I think one of the reasons why so many of our campuses have ended up sort of slowly but inexorably moving from free and open source software for supporting things like course management and campus blogging solutions and what else you have. Um, Inexorably moved from the free and open source solutions to corporate solutions has been precisely because of the labor involved in maintaining those free and open source systems. Where if we can get a service level agreement with a corporate provider that says, like, if you have a problem, we're going to deal with it. There, there has been a kind of risk averseness and a desire to like push those problems off campus and have somebody else deal with it. It's not clear how successful that has been. I mean, we have seen how poorly many of our corporate owned platforms actually perform, and how difficult it can be to persuade the maintainers of those platforms to get them to do the things we need them to do. So, you know, we might be well served by thinking about reversing that trend and thinking about free and open source systems as ones that we have to put work into maintaining, but that we get the value back from that work.
Yeah, is it hard for you to make that case on your own campus or other campuses? And when I ask that question, I'll just tell you why I'm asking it. You know, I work with software all the time that's commercial, that's proprietary, and doesn't work well.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
work with open source software all the time that has many of the same issues and problems as the proprietary software that I'm using.
Yeah.
But when things don't work well in an open source solution, it has a different connotation, a different emphasis.
Yeah.
People react differently than when a proprietary system crashes, doesn't work well. And what can we do as open advocates to educate people, to help them understand that not every bug, not every error is the end of the world?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think one of the things that we need to do is to recognize the extent to which like free and open source software is free and open source because it's maintained by a community. And ensuring the strength of that community is crucial to the strength of the software itself. Corporate software has its own goals, and those goals do not align with ours very, very frequently. And so when things go wrong in a corporate-owned solution, very frequently we're going to find ourselves running into a wall of like, oh yeah, we'll get somebody to look at that, or we'll like, that's on our roadmap, we've got that covered, but with the free and open source software community, we're very often able to reach out to actual humans who care about this software in a significant way. Now, these are overworked and underpaid humans who often don't have the kind of time for maintenance. But the recent crisis around, and now I'm going to completely blank out on the situation, it was the XZ hack, right, in which like this very little function that has been deployed in countless software projects, not just necessarily free and open software projects, but tons of networking projects, got very cleverly hacked by a bad actor, because the single maintainer of that little function was experiencing a mental health issue around his stress level and the lack of support for maintaining this piece of software. And so the bad actor was able to intervene and create a backdoor and do just tremendous amounts of damage. Now, the good news in this, I mean, that might make you go, oh my God, free and open source software is dangerous because people can contribute to it and be bad actors. But the fact that this had happened was uncovered by another free and open source software project. And the community rallied to fix the problem very quickly and to help with the maintenance of this particular function that the original developer was having such issues with. And I think in response to this, we are likely to see funding programs that are fundamentally interested in free and open source software, like the Digital Infrastructure Fund, like Sloan, like other kinds of funders are suddenly recognizing that maintenance is a crucial problem in open source software, and that maintenance demands support. And so I'm really hoping that we're going to see a better landscape for the maintenance of free and open source software platforms coming in the next couple of years.
Well, you missed my talk, but in my talk at the Digital Learning Conference, one of the things that I was hitting home about was that we shouldn't make a dichotomy between open source software and commercial software.
Yeah.
It's impossible to do anymore because every commercial software has open source components built throughout it. And we're not talking about entire programs. We're talking about libraries. We're talking about utilities that are reused over and over. And that's how modern programming has been taught and how it's being done. And so really open source and commercial, it's a false dichotomy. There is the freely shared code and the not freely shared code.
Yeah.
It's all being built from the same building blocks. So we have to maintain the health in some way. We have 2 minutes left. And so I want to invite you to close out our conference in whatever way you see fit using those 2 minutes.
Oh my goodness, such pressure. I just want to thank you, and to thank the folks who have showed up here, and to thank, everyone for participating in these conversations about the open infrastructure, and about digital citizenship, and about the kinds of education that we want to see thrive into the future. I think the landscape that we are entering into right now is increasingly complex. And old definitions, as you just say, of corporate software versus free and open software, they don't apply in the same way. I think we have all got to really take a kind of initiative in thinking about the future that we want to see, and in supporting the kinds of work that we want to rely upon. So I again, thank you for participating in this, and thank you for allowing me to participate in this. And Yay.
Thank you so much for your time. I do have one final question. You've
Yes.
talked so much about the future. Are you hopeful about the future?
I am hopeful. I am hopeful. I see really great things arising everywhere I look, and I think the future for the commons is really fantastic. I just got to peer review a book that hopefully will be coming out in the next year. That's about the role that the commons in general, not my comments, that the commons might play in the future of scholarly communication, and that there is going to be a book coming out from a university press on this, I hope really bodes well for all of the kinds of work that we want to do in the future.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for being here today. You see in the chat, Jen Snyder, one of our fabulous supporters at the CPD, who we cannot thank enough. The workers at the CPD who came in and moderated every session, who set up the technology, made sure that we were able to do this today. I just want to give them my heartfelt thanks. They are the human infrastructure that lets a digital conference like this happen, and that infrastructure is important. She has invited us to go to a quick wrap-up session in a different Zoom room. I hope you'll join us there to talk about what we learned today. I want to thank you for your time just one more time. It's been so wonderful to have you with us and has really made my afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. I'll see you over in the other room.
Got it.